So the idea here is I have to help you baseline language. One of the big challenges in the DEI space is people are not speaking from the same sheet of music, right? And so you got really good people that are trying to figure out how to navigate through this space, how to attract and retain the best possible people, and they bump up against each other because they're not using the same language. So we're gonna spend some time doing that because it's really important. Now, this is the model that we base all of our work on over at JP when we're working with companies. And if you wanna have a different result, different outcome, different culture, or we want to hire different kinds of people, want the broadest possible talent pool, what we got to do is have meaningful interactions with people, places, and systems. This is an example of a meaningful interaction. Coaching sessions are an example of meaningful interactions. We did what we call small cohort development sessions with teams to help them get more comfortable talking about some of the most difficult issues of the day. How am I supposed to be able to talk about a gender issue to my team if I've never done it before? I'm gonna stumble over myself, I'm gonna feel awkward and uncomfortable, I'm not gonna feel like I've got it. However, if I'm comfortable with it and I know it's gonna be awkward, I'm gonna jump in feet first. Head first, say, okay, look team, this is gonna be uncomfortable, but we've gotta do it, right? So we wanna have those meaningful interactions that challenge and reinforce people's beliefs and values that impact their behavior and decision making. For example, I have a friend, he is a serious evangelical from Savannah, Georgia, right? He is all in with his Savannah-ness and all in with his church-goingness. Good for him, right? He went off to Japan to visit and do some stuff. And I said, well, tell me a story about what that experience was like for you. And he says, man, James, I was going up this temple in Japan to visit the temple at the top of these stairs, and the tour guide says, this temple is over 3,000 years old. I said, okay, I don't get it. He says, James, where I'm from, what I believe, the world is not 3,000 years old. I was like, oh, well, that challenges one's beliefs. And then it's gonna impact some of the behaviors and decisions that he might make, how he's gonna operate when he engages with people now. He doesn't have to change his beliefs at all, but he has to recognize that over here, people think differently, right? And that's gonna help him engage with people differently. So I'm gonna ask, again, in terms of baselining, that we, for today, can agree that diversity is the full range of human difference. Everything about you and everything about me that makes us similar or different. Okay? Are we good with that? The second piece is that inclusivity is the level of belonging in an environment, in your organization, in your company, on your team. Do I feel like I belong on your team? That's inclusivity. And it's driven by you as the leader, your key performance indicators, your policies, your practices, your procedures. So diversity, the full range of human difference. Your favorite color to whether you were born in the suburbs or in a city or anything else. All of that. Inclusivity. Do you feel like you belong to the team or the organization or the family or the church or whatever it might be? Really important to baseline language. The absence of this causes all kinds of fight to things like Thanksgiving. Now, I do believe very strongly that diversity is everything about you and I that makes us similar or different. But I also believe that some things are more impactful than others. That's what we call the Dibs Big 9. These are the 9 most impactful components of diversity, right? In order to make this list, it must have a huge impact on how the world sees you. It must have a huge impact on how you see the world, right? And it must be that all by itself. So if we take gender, since it's closest to me over here, gender all by itself is a big deal. It really impacts how people see you and how you see the world. And then when I add it to this list, it's still a big deal. It doesn't diminish just because it's up here with these others. Okay. The newest one we added on this recently is geography, which is to say where I'm from. Where I'm from matters. I have my people are from the South, from Louisiana and from Alabama. I was raised in Colorado. And I recognize over and over again, and I have to out this about myself, that there were times when if I wanted to talk about somebody who I didn't think made a particularly smart comment, I would flex into a Southern accent. Well, that's not very kind. That's not very nice, right? Where you're from matters. If you're from the Northeast or from the West Coast, you're from Florida or you're from Montana, it matters. If you're from out of the country, we have some international clients and they'll say all the time, if the major footprint is in the US, they will say it matters that I'm not from the US. Not as much that I'm a woman, not as much that I'm a man, not as much that I'm brown or that I'm Asian. It matters more that I'm not from the US when I'm trying to make a point in a meeting. So geography. And on this list, you'll also see religion and politics, and I'll highlight those because we try to run from them sometimes. But the truth is they are extremely important to many of our team members and colleagues. And if we ignore that, we're ignoring a very rich part of who they are. It doesn't mean that I'm going to people saying, what do you believe? What do you believe religiously? What are you doing on Saturday and Sunday and Wednesday? That's not what I'm talking about. I'm saying I'm going to recognize that my team members come from different religious backgrounds. It isn't that interesting. And I may go to them and say, hey, Bob, you're part of this team. Your religious background is a little different than mine. Can you help me understand if we're doing anything that might be scratching up against you that we can shift? It might be about time off and shifting a holiday. Who knows? Maybe something that simple. There was a time when if we would have asked that question of women, they might have said, well, maybe I could get some time off after I have a baby. Right? There was a time when we could have asked them that. And they might have said, yeah, that'd be nice. We continued to ask that question, and men said, I'd like to stay home with the baby every now and again, so how about we work out some paternity leave? That's how we can use this as a tool to improve our functionality as leaders. Are we good? All right. Another piece of baselining and making sure we're speaking from the same sheet of music. My guess is most of us have heard the term bias before. And you've heard the conscious part, you've heard the unconscious part. But it's important to be speaking from the same sheet of music. The lesson from this slide is that you cannot possibly know what your unconscious biases are. If you did, they would be conscious. That's the lesson from this slide. There's some things I'm consciously biased about. There's no doubt about it. Right? I'm a military vet. I come from a military family. I like military things. I'm a formal person, but I'm formal like a military person is formal, not like a business person is formal. I like those guys and ladies and everybody else. During the holidays and they're walking around in their uniforms and heading home, I like that. I think it looks really cool, right? Now, I know a bunch of them didn't go into the military for public service and that. I didn't. I went in because we didn't have money and I needed to find a way to pay for college. And that's frankly the story of most of the people that I know. Most of the people in the military didn't have any money. Sidebar, it's poor people that fight wars, right? Poor people and young people. So I like those kinds of people, but it's conscious for me. I don't know what my unconscious biases are. I need help from my team to find out. We need help from our teams to find out. The question is, do we make it easy for them to come and tap us on the shoulder and say, I think you might want to think about something? All right? Everybody okay with the difference, conscious and unconscious? All right, so we talked about the model, we baselined some language. We developed something over at JPE called the Dibs assessment model. We were being asked over and over and over again by leaders, how do we know how well we're doing at this so that we can be more specific with our efforts? It's one thing to have a bias train, okay, that's great, but there's all these different things I could be biased about, consciously or unconsciously. How do I know where I should focus? So we built this assessment. Each of these bubbles, hesitant, investigating, engaging, discomfort, experimenting, is a place where one of us could be. I could be in the experimenting place. I could be in the hesitant place. And where you are is fine. And you might be in a different place relative to any of the Dibs Big 9 that we talked about before. Maybe I'm hesitant for race, but I'm in discomfort for sexuality. And that's fine too, right? So I'm going to go through each of these bubbles and describe them, and then we'll come back and talk about it a little bit afterwards. So the first one. If you find yourself in the hesitant space, and let's just focus for the moment, let's focus on gender and gender identity, right? And the use of pronouns and all that other kind of stuff that's new, right? So we're gonna just focus on that as our place of interaction. So if you are hesitant when it comes to gender, you might say, look, I just wanna be around people who identify the same way I do in terms of gender. For me, that will be men. I just wanna be around men. It's not that I have issues with women. I think they're fine, that's great. But I'd prefer just to be around people like me. And when people come up with these non-business conversations around difference and women need this and gender non-binary, I don't think that belongs in the workplace. That belongs over there. Take a coffee break, go talk about it all you want to. Then come back and let's get to work. I don't have issues with them. Do what you want to do. I don't care. I just don't think it belongs in the workplace. Let's not talk about that over here. And frankly, if I raise my hand and say that, somebody's going to come out for me. They're going to come for me. They're going to try to cancel me. They're going to try to fire me. They're going to try to take my resources, take my contracts. That's what's going to happen. So I'm going to keep my hand down, keep my hands in my pockets. That's hesitant. Everybody good with that? Discomfort. Staying with gender for the sake of this discussion. If I find myself in the discomfort place, I'd say, look, I'm around different kinds of gender roles all the time, but it's a function of my job. My job requires that I have to be around all these different people. When these non-business conversations come up about gender identity and all of that, I'm not comfortable with it at all, man. It makes me rock back and forth, right? And I'm not convinced of how it helps us as a business. I'm not convinced at all. I have some anxiety about speaking about my truth. I don't think I'll get fired, but I might get embarrassed, right? I might get my hand slapped, and I'm not doing that. Then there's investigating. People in the investigating space might say, look, this gender identity stuff, it's interesting. Boy, it's thought-provoking. I'm learning a lot. I didn't know all this stuff even existed. These people have these different ideas about things. I had no idea. I'm just at the edges of seeing the business connection, why it might make sense to have people with different genders around a decision-making table. I think I'm beginning to understand why that might be important. I want to learn more. I need to learn more. I should learn more, but I don't close the loop. I didn't watch the podcast. I didn't go to the workshop. I'm not following different people on social media. I'm not tapping my team members on the shoulder and saying, hey, this gender identity thing, how are we doing with that? How can I get better? I'm not doing any of those things, right? That's investigating, not closing the loop, but it's thought-provoking. Experimenting. These people are closing the loop. They're doing the hard work to say, hey, Billy, talk to me about what it's like to be a part of this team, given how we operate from a gender perspective. How do you feel about this he, she, they pronoun usage kind of stuff? How do you think people think about me? How can I lead better? How can I be a better teammate as it relates to this? Man, there's got to be a bunch of talented people of varying genders. How do we get them on our team? I want to win. And so tell me how we can do that. I'm asking myself these questions. I'm asking my team this question. I'm bringing it to the table. This is what I mean by leading in the absence of expertise at the beginning of the session. I'm getting better and better at defining diversity, inclusion, and bias. In this case, it relates to gender in our example, because I'm doing the hard work. I'm taking the time to look up what this stuff means and then ask people questions about it. The last one's engaging. In this one, it is organic. It is natural for you. Of course I'm in with the different gender identities. No problem, no issues, whatever. And if I'm in a room full of people of the same gender as me, I go find another room to be in because I would just prefer to be around different people. That's who I am. That's how I operate, right? And remember, all of these descriptions can apply to race, sexuality, gender, politics, religion, differing abilities, age, etc. Socioeconomics, all of it applies to all of it. But we're using gender identity for the moment. Everybody good with me? Everybody striking? Okay. Now, these are the bubbles. And there's things that move us in between these bubbles. Right? And the thing that moves us in between those bubbles are these meaningful interactions that I talked about. When somebody taps you on the shoulder and says, hey, James, I have a question I want to ask you about gender identity stuff. Let's say somebody on my team comes and says, hey, as you know, I've been going through some transition stuff and I'm thinking about having my surgery. How is our insurance policy around that? Whoa, 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 whoa. I was okay high-fiving you every now and again, but now you're asking me other questions, right? So how much time are you going to take off? And now we've got a different conversation. That may move me in these bubbles, right? When it comes to, say, race, for example, I spend most of my time in the experimenting place, working hard to try to close the bubbles, right? I try to be engaging when I can, but I don't always make it there in some of these bubbles, right? And in the summer of 2020, I was pushed from experimenting to hesitant because of all the stuff that was happening. I just want to be around people like me. I was in my apartment during COVID, walking around in circles, calling people like me. Hey, what are you doing? What are you doing? What are you talking about? What's going on with you? Only people like me. And it was a good friend of mine who called me and she says she's from the Northeast. I was only talking to black guys who are about my age, mostly that I went to school with. That's it. It was the only people I'm talking to. And this woman calls me and she says, hey, James, what are you doing? said, I'm doing the same thing everybody else is doing, walking around in circles, upset at the world, right? Why is all this stuff happening? Blah, 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 blah. She says, whoa, aren't you supposed to be an expert in this stuff? Aren't you supposed to be leading conversation in this stuff? Shouldn't you be doing something? I was like, look, ma'am, what I'm gonna need you to do is get off my phone and let me be upset, right? But that was the meaningful interaction I needed. Well, there was one meaningful interaction that pushed me into hesitance. My conversation with her was a meaningful interaction to help bring me back out, right? And then I could get back to work. So meaningful interactions matter. Maybe you're having them with a family member or a teammate or whomever. But that's what moves us in between these things, meaningful interactions.